When a school janitor notices a quiet second grader who refuses to take off his shoes even for gym class, something about the boy's pained movements begins to concern him. What began as simple curiosity would soon expose a trusted professional's dark obsession and put both the child and janitor in the crosshairs of someone powerful enough to make them disappear. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that sometimes ordinary people can become extraordinary heroes, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that matter. He couldn't have known that those worn-out sneakers would lead him down a dangerous path until he found the first hidden mark that changed everything. Mike Callahan had been the head custodian at Pinewood Elementary for nearly 15 years. At 53, his salt and pepper hair and weathered hands told the story of a life spent in diligent work. The school was his domain, every squeaky hinge, flickering light, and temperamental radiator as familiar to him as the lines on his palm. He took pride in maintaining the aging building that housed over 300 children, seeing his role not just as a job but as a contribution to their safety and well-being. The students knew Mr. Callahan as the quiet man with kind eyes who could fix anything. He kept peppermints in his pocket for children having tough days and carried a small toolkit on his belt that seemed to contain solutions for every crisis, from jammed lockers to broken eyeglasses. Though he rarely spoke about his past, the staff knew he'd come to Pinewood after retiring from the Navy, where he'd served as a mechanic aboard aircraft carriers. That training had instilled in him an attention to detail that made him exceptional at his job. Mike lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment just 8 blocks from the school. His wife, Marie, had passed away from breast cancer 6 years earlier, and though they'd wanted children, it hadn't happened for them. Perhaps that was why he felt such a protective instinct toward the students at Pinewood. They filled a void in his life that would otherwise have remained empty. His apartment felt too quiet most evenings, with only a senior tabby cat named Admiral for company. Principal Vaughn often praised Mike's dedication, noting that he went far beyond the responsibilities listed in his job description. "You're the backbone of this place," she told him during his last performance review. Mike had simply nodded, uncomfortable with praise but pleased nonetheless. What he never mentioned was how closely he observed the children as he worked, not in any inappropriate way, but with the watchful eye of someone who had learned to spot small anomalies that others might miss. Lisa Chun, the school nurse, had become Mike's closest ally at Pinewood. They shared a coffee break most mornings before the students arrived, discussing everything from school politics to their favorite mystery novels. Lisa appreciated Mike's insights about the students, how he noticed when a usually energetic child became withdrawn, or when a typically neat student began leaving messes behind. These observations had helped her identify issues ranging from bullying to undiagnosed illnesses. There had been discussions at recent staff meetings about the district's new pediatric consultant, Dr. Alan Whitmore, who was implementing an innovative health screening program across all elementary schools. Dr. Whitmore came with impressive credentials, Harvard Medical School, research publications, a private practice in the affluent part of town, and a charismatic presence that had won over the school board and most of the administration. Mike had only encountered Dr. Whitmore briefly during one of his visits to the school. Something about the physician's practice smile and the way his friendly demeanor never quite reached his eyes had left Mike uneasy. During their brief handshake, Mike had noticed the doctor's manicured nails and firm grip, hands that had likely never known hard labor. It was an irrational dislike, Mike told himself, and he'd pushed it aside as simple class prejudice. Early fall had settled over the small town of Oak Ridge, bringing with it crisp mornings and the occasional rain shower. Pinewood Elementary, a red brick building constructed in the 1970s, stood on a gentle hill overlooking a small wooded area that gave the school its name. The ancient pine trees surrounding the playground offered shade in warmer months and now dropped their needles onto the asphalt, creating extra work for Mike and his assistant custodian, Raoul. It was during one such rainy morning in late September that Mike first noticed something unusual about Ethan Parker, a second grader who had transferred to Pinewood just after the school year began. The boy was small for his age, with a mop of dark hair that frequently fell into his eyes and a perpetually worried expression. His file noted that he lived with his mother, a single parent who worked long hours as a paralegal at a downtown law firm. But nothing could prepare Mike for the mystery that would unfold around Ethan's shoes. The first time Mike really noticed something odd was during a particularly heavy downpour. The children had come in from recess soaking wet, leaving puddles and muddy footprints throughout the hallways. Mike had set up caution signs and was methodically mopping the floors when he spotted Ethan walking with an unusual, pained gait. Unlike the other children who had changed into dry shoes kept in their lockers or removed wet ones entirely, Ethan still wore his soaked sneakers, leaving a trail of water behind him. "Hey there, buddy," Mike had said gently, stopping the boy with a raised hand. "You're going to catch cold in those wet shoes. Don't you have another pair in your locker?" Ethan had frozen, eyes widening like a cornered animal. "I'm fine," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the clamor of children moving between classes. "I like these ones." Mike frowned slightly, noting how the boy's socks were visibly soaked through, the shoes themselves worn nearly to shreds. "At least let me help you dry them a bit," he offered, reaching for a roll of paper towels on his cart.
"No."
Ethan's response was unexpectedly sharp, causing several passing students to turn and look. The boy seemed to shrink under the attention. "I mean, no thank you, Mr. Callahan.
"I'm okay."
Before Mike could respond, Ethan had hurried away, his wet shoes squeaking against the recently mopped floor. The janitor stood watching him go, puzzled by the interaction but already being called away to handle a spill in the cafeteria. That might have been the end of it. One strange interaction among dozens each day, except that Mike began to notice a pattern. During his rounds throughout the school, he observed that Ethan never seemed to change his shoes. During gym class, when other children changed into sneakers or athletic shoes, Ethan always had a note excusing him from participation or allowing him to participate without changing. At swimming lessons in the community center pool, he was conspicuously absent. "Have you noticed anything odd about the Parker boy?" Mike asked Lisa during their morning coffee break about 2 weeks after the rainy day incident. Lisa looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Ethan? He's been in to see me a few times for headaches. Very polite, very quiet. Why do you ask?" Mike hesitated, not wanting to seem like he was overstepping his boundaries. "It's probably nothing. Just noticed he seems pretty attached to his shoes. Won't take them off even when they're soaking wet. They're falling apart, 2 holes in the soles. Laces broken. Could be a financial issue," Lisa suggested. "His mom's raising him alone. Maybe new shoes aren't in the budget right now." "Maybe," Mike agreed, though something in his gut told him there was more to it. "Just seems like he's in pain sometimes when he walks. And awfully protective about those specific shoes." Lisa tapped her pen thoughtfully against her coffee mug. "I can keep an eye out. He's actually scheduled for the new health screening with Dr. Whitmore next week. I could mention it then." "Whitmore," Mike repeated, that initial unease returning. "He's doing these screenings alone?" "I assist with them," Lisa assured him. "Standard procedure: height, weight, vision, hearing, basic physical exam. Nothing invasive. Parents sign permission forms." Mike nodded, telling himself his concerns were probably unfounded. Still, he found himself paying more attention to Ethan Parker over the next few days, noticing how the boy isolated himself during recess, sitting alone on a bench rather than running with the other children. How he winced slightly with each step. How his face seemed to tighten with pain at unexpected moments. It was the following Tuesday when Mike was called to the boys' bathroom near the second-grade classrooms. A toilet had overflowed, and water was seeping into the hallway. Armed with his plunger and mop, he pushed open the door to find Ethan Parker standing at a sink, one shoe off and his sock partially removed, hurriedly trying to rinse something from his foot. The boy hadn't heard Mike enter over the sound of running water, giving the janitor a clear view of what Ethan was so desperate to hide. The child's foot was a landscape of angry red marks, blisters, and what appeared to be small, precise puncture wounds. Some were fresh, others partially healed, but all were clearly deliberate and methodically placed. Mike froze, the plunger gripped tightly in his hand. His sharp intake of breath alerted Ethan to his presence, and the boy's head snapped up, his expression transforming from pain to terror in an instant. "Mr. Callahan," Ethan gasped, immediately dropping his foot and scrambling to pull his sock back on. I got something in my shoe. I didn't. Ethan, Mike said softly, setting down his plunger and approaching slowly as one might a frightened animal. Your foot, what happened? Nothing. The desperation in the child's voice was heartbreaking. I fell. It's fine. Please don't tell anyone. Mike knelt down, keeping a respectful distance but making eye contact with the boy. Ethan, those don't look like injuries from falling. Someone hurt you, didn't they? Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, but he shook his head vigorously. No one will believe me, he whispered. He said no one would believe a kid. A cold weight settled in Mike's stomach. Who said that, Ethan? The boy looked around fearfully, as if expecting someone to emerge from one of the stalls. I can't tell. He said he'd hurt my mom if I told. He knows where we live. He knows everything. Mike struggled to keep his voice calm despite the rage building inside him. Ethan, I promise you, I will believe you. And I will do everything I can to keep both you and your mom safe. That's my job, to keep everyone in this school safe. Ethan's bottom lip trembled as he seemed to weigh his options. Finally, in a voice so small Mike had to lean closer to hear it, he said, Dr. Whitmore, during the special exams. The name hit Mike like a physical blow, confirming his worst suspicions. The health screenings? He asked, needing to be absolutely certain. Ethan nodded miserably. He says he's fixing my feet, that they're defective, that he has to do special procedures but no one else would understand. He does it when Nurse Chin leaves the room to get supplies or answer the phone. A sob escaped him. It hurts so much, but he says if I'm tough and don't tell anyone, it means I'm special, that I'm helping science. Mike's mind raced, processing what he was hearing. A respected doctor abusing his position, using his authority to isolate and hurt a vulnerable child, and potentially others. The methodical nature of the injuries suggested something beyond impulsive cruelty. This was calculated, sustained abuse disguised as medical treatment. Ethan, Mike said carefully, what you've told me is very brave. I need to report this right away to keep you safe, but I won't leave your side until I'm sure you're protected. Is that okay? Another tear slipped down Ethan's cheek, but he gave a tiny nod. I'm going to text Nurse Chun to come here, and then we're going to call the police. Not the school security, the real police. Mike pulled out his phone, sending a quick message to Lisa asking her to come to the second-grade boys' bathroom immediately for an emergency. He'll be mad, Ethan whispered fearfully. He'll know I told. He won't be able to hurt you anymore, Mike promised, though he knew the road ahead would be difficult. From this moment on, you're not facing this alone. What Mike couldn't have known then was how far Dr. Whitmore's influence extended, or that by uncovering this abuse, he had set in motion events that would test not only his courage but the integrity of the entire community systems meant to protect its most vulnerable members. Lisa arrived within minutes, her expression shifting from confusion to horror as Mike quietly explained what he had discovered. With Ethan's permission, her medical training kicked in immediately. Ethan, I'm so sorry this happened to you, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. Mr. Callahan is right. You've been incredibly brave. I'm going to call Detective Rodriguez. He's a police officer who specializes in helping kids, and he'll know exactly what to do next. While Lisa made the call, Mike stayed beside Ethan, who seemed simultaneously terrified and relieved. The weight of his secret had clearly been crushing him for weeks. Am I in trouble? Ethan asked softly.
No, Buddy.
Not at all, Mike assured him. The only person in trouble is the one who hurt you. Within 30 minutes, Detective James Rodriguez arrived at the school, accompanied by a social worker named Mariana Diaz who specialized in child trauma. They spoke with Ethan gently but thoroughly, documenting his account and photographing his injuries with clinical precision. The social worker explained each step beforehand, always asking for Ethan's permission. Principal Vaughn, initially skeptical when informed of the allegations against such a prominent figure, turned pale upon seeing the photographic evidence. My God, she whispered, And this happened during school hours? Under our roof. Whitmore was strategic, Detective Rodriguez explained grimly. He created interruptions for the nurse during examinations, phone calls about urgent matters that were later proven false, requests for specific supplies kept in another room. He established routines that gave him short periods alone with the children. Children, Lisa echoed. Plural. We don't know yet, Rodriguez said carefully. But predators rarely have only one victim. We'll need to speak with every child who underwent these screenings. Ethan's mother, Andrea Parker, arrived at the school in a state of controlled panic, having been called away from an important deposition. When she saw her son's injuries, her professional composure crumbled entirely. I asked why he wouldn't take his shoes off at home, she said through tears, holding Ethan close. He said his feet were embarrassing, that a doctor was fixing them. I thought he meant his regular pediatrician had diagnosed something minor, flat feet, maybe. I was going to ask at his next checkup. But I've been so overwhelmed with this new job. Her voice broke with guilt. Ms. Parker, this is not your fault, Detective Rodriguez assured her firmly. Dr. Whitmore deliberately misled everyone, the school, the parents, even his medical colleagues. He exploited his position of authority specifically to gain access to children. What happens now? Mike asked, still processing how a simple observation about shoes had uncovered something so sinister. Immediate protective orders for Ethan and potentially other victims, Rodriguez replied. A thorough investigation of every school where Whitmore conducted these screenings, and most urgently, his immediate arrest. But nothing could prepare them for what would happen next. The investigation expanded rapidly over the following days. Detectives discovered that Dr. Whitmore had implemented similar, innovative screening programs at 3 other elementary schools in neighboring districts over the past 2 years. When authorities attempted to arrest him at his private practice, they found the office hastily cleared out and Whitmore himself gone. He must have been tipped off, Detective Rodriguez told Mike during one of their many conversations that week. The custodian had become an important witness and ally in the investigation, having been the first to notice and report the abuse. Someone with connections warned him we were coming. The revelation of Whitmore's escape sent shockwaves through the small community. Parents demanded answers, the school board convened emergency meetings, and security was increased at Pinewood Elementary after a threatening letter addressed to the janitor who should have minded his own business was found taped to the staff entrance early one morning. Mike found himself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. Some parents hailed him as a hero for his attentiveness and courage in reporting what he'd found. Others, particularly those with connections to the wealthy circles where Whitmore had been considered a respected figure, suggested he had overreacted to a child's minor injuries from normal childhood activities. The polarization within the community intensified when forensic examination of Whitmore's abandoned medical offices revealed disturbing evidence. Hidden cameras had been installed in examination rooms. A locked cabinet contained detailed journals documenting what Whitmore referred to as corrective procedures performed on multiple children, complete with clinical photographs and notes on their pain responses. Most disturbingly, the journals revealed a pseudoscientific justification for the abuse. Whitmore believed he was developing revolutionary treatments for foot abnormalities, using children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds as unwitting test subjects. The discoveries transformed the case from concerning to horrifying. Local news covered the story extensively, though they carefully avoided naming any of the child victims. Mike's role in uncovering the abuse was mentioned, however, making him increasingly uncomfortable as reporters sought him out for interviews. He consistently declined. I was just doing my job, he told Lisa during one of their now-daily debriefing sessions. Keeping the kids safe. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't, Mike, Lisa pointed out gently. How many adults saw Ethan every day and didn't notice something was wrong? You did. You paid attention when others didn't. For Ethan and his mother, the weeks following the revelation were both challenging and healing. Andrea Parker had taken family leave from her law firm to support her son through the investigation and beginning of therapy. The boy's physical injuries were treated properly by a pediatric specialist, but the psychological wounds would take longer to heal. Surprisingly, it was Mike who provided an unexpected source of comfort for Ethan during this difficult period. The janitor had always kept his distance from students, mindful of professional boundaries, but with Principal Vaughn's approval, he began spending his lunch breaks with Ethan. They would sit together in the courtyard, sometimes talking, sometimes working side by side as Mike taught the boy simple repair skills, fixing a loose cabinet hinge, changing a light bulb, activities that gave Ethan a sense of control and competence that had been stripped from him by Whitmore's abuse. "Mr. Callahan?" Ethan asked one day as they shared a bench in the weak October sunshine. "Do you think they'll find him?" Mike considered the question carefully. "I believe they will, yes. Detective Rodriguez is very good at his job, and Dr. Whitmore made a lot of people very angry. People don't stay hidden forever when that many folks are looking for them." "I'm still scared sometimes," Ethan admitted, fidgeting with his new shoes, proper athletic sneakers that Andrea had purchased after learning of the abuse. "What if he comes back? What if he's mad at me for telling?" "That's a normal feeling," Mike assured him. "But remember, you've got a whole team protecting you now. Your mom, the police, the school, me. We're all working together to keep you safe." The breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. A nurse who had previously worked with Whitmore at a prestigious research hospital recognized his methods from the news reports. She contacted detectives with crucial information. Whitmore had been quietly dismissed from his position at the hospital 2 years earlier after colleagues raised concerns about his unorthodox and potentially harmful research on pediatric patients. Instead of reporting him to medical authorities, the hospital had allowed him to resign with a neutral reference to avoid scandal. The nurse's testimony provided investigators with new leads, including the location of a cabin owned by Whitmore's family in a remote area near the Canadian border. When authorities raided the property, they found the doctor had indeed been hiding there, along with extensive research materials and equipment that suggested he had planned to continue his work despite being exposed. The arrest made national headlines. Images of the respected pediatrician being led away in handcuffs shattered the carefully constructed facade he had maintained for years. The subsequent investigation revealed a pattern of abuse spanning nearly a decade, with dozens of victims across multiple institutions, all children from vulnerable backgrounds who Whitmore had believed wouldn't be believed or protected. At Pinewood Elementary, the arrest brought a collective sense of relief, but also soul-searching about how such abuse could have occurred within their walls. New protocols were implemented for all medical examinations, requiring 2 staff members to be present at all times. Background checks for all consultants were enhanced, and staff received additional training on recognizing signs of abuse. For Mike, the conclusion of the manhunt didn't end his involvement with Ethan. The boy continued to seek him out, finding comfort in the janitor's steady presence and practical wisdom. After consulting with Ethan's therapist, Andrea invited Mike to join them for dinner one evening, the first of what would become a regular tradition as Mike gradually became a trusted friend to both mother and son. "I never properly thanked you," Andrea said one evening as they sat on her small apartment balcony while Ethan played a video game inside. "If you hadn't noticed, something was wrong." "But I did," Mike said simply. "That's all that matters." Andrea studied him thoughtfully. "You know, Ethan asked me something interesting yesterday. He wanted to know if you might teach him how to fix more things, not just at school, but maybe here at home too. Our bathroom sink has been dripping for months, and apparently he told his therapist he wants to learn how to fix it like Mr. Callahan would." Mike felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. "I'd be happy to show him, if that's okay with you, of course." "More than okay," Andrea said with a genuine smile. "I think he needs a positive male figure in his life right now. Someone trustworthy." The trial of Dr. Alan Whitmore began in early spring, almost 6 months after Mike had discovered the abuse. The prosecution had built an overwhelming case, with physical evidence, documentation in Whitmore's own hand, and testimony from multiple victims. Ethan, showing remarkable courage for a child his age, had decided to testify with the support of his therapist and victim advocates. "Are you sure you want to do this, buddy?" Mike had asked when Ethan told him about his decision. They were working together on a broken pencil sharpener in the school's maintenance room, a quiet space where Ethan now spent many of his recesses learning basic repair skills. Ethan nodded, his expression serious. Dr. Patterson, my therapist, says that telling my story might help me feel stronger. And maybe it will help the other kids too, knowing they're not alone. Mike felt a surge of pride. That's very brave. Just remember, whatever you decide is okay. You've already done more than should ever be asked of someone your age. The day of Ethan's testimony, Mike took a rare day off work to accompany Andrea to the courthouse at her request. They sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as Ethan walked to the witness stand. His new sneakers, red with black laces, his current favorites, squeaking slightly on the polished floor. With remarkable composure, Ethan described the treatments Whitmore had performed on his feet, inserting needles into specific pressure points, applying heat and cold to test pain thresholds, all while convincing the boy that his feet were defective and these procedures were necessary corrections. He explained how the doctor had threatened him, making him believe that no adult would take his word over that of a Harvard-educated physician. "And why did you finally tell someone what was happening?" the prosecutor asked gently. Ethan glanced toward the back of the courtroom, finding Mike's supportive gaze. "Because Mr. Callahan noticed my shoes," he said simply. "He saw me when nobody else did. And when I told him what was happening, he believed me right away, just like he promised he would." The jury took less than 4 hours to return a guilty verdict on all counts. Whitmore was sentenced to 25 years in prison without possibility of parole for 18 years, effectively ending his freedom during the childhood of all his victims. Additionally, the hospitals and school districts that had failed to report his behavior faced significant civil penalties and were ordered to establish victim compensation funds. The verdicts and sentencing brought closure for many, but for Ethan and the other children, healing would be an ongoing journey. The physical scars would fade with time, but rebuilding trust in authority figures and developing healthy relationships would require continuous support. In the aftermath of the trial, several positive changes emerged from the darkness of Whitmore's crimes. Andrea Parker, drawing on her legal background and personal experience, became an advocate for stronger child protection policies in schools and medical settings. She helped draft legislation requiring more rigorous background checks and establishing clear protocols for reporting suspicious behavior by professionals working with children. Pinewood Elementary implemented a comprehensive safety program that became a model for other schools in the region. Principal Vaughn, determined to ensure such abuse could never again occur on her watch, established regular training sessions for all staff, including maintenance and cafeteria workers, on recognizing and reporting signs of potential abuse. For Mike Callahan, life changed in unexpected ways. His role in uncovering Whitmore's crimes earned him a formal commendation from the school board and the respect of the entire community. More meaningful to him, however, was the relationship he developed with Ethan and Andrea. What began as casual dinners and home repair lessons gradually evolved into deeper friendship and mutual support. 3 months after the trial concluded, Andrea approached Mike with a tentative question. "Ethan's having a birthday party next weekend," she said during one of their now regular Sunday afternoon get-togethers. "Nothing big, just a few friends from school and some family. He specifically asked if you would come. Not just as a guest, but to help him show his friends some of the repair skills you've been teaching him. His therapist thinks it's helping him regain a sense of control." Mike, touched by the invitation, readily agreed. "I'd be honored. I could bring some safe tools for the kids to try out, maybe set up a little workshop station." The day of the party arrived, and Mike found himself surrounded by energetic second graders eager to learn how to use screwdrivers and wrenches under his careful supervision. Ethan moved confidently among his friends, showing off the skills he'd learned, his eyes bright with pride. Andrea watched from nearby, exchanging occasional glances with Mike, quiet moments of shared joy in Ethan's progress. Later, as the party wound down and the last guests departed, Ethan approached Mike with a small, carefully wrapped package. "Mom said usually the birthday kid gets the presents," he explained seriously. "But I wanted to give you something too, because of everything." Mike carefully unwrapped the gift to find a framed photograph of Ethan and himself, taken during a school field day. Beside it was a handmade card with "Thank you for fixing more than just our school," written in a child's careful printing. "This is the best gift I've received in a very long time," Mike said, his voice rougher than usual with emotion. "Thank you, Ethan." As Mike prepared to leave, Andrea walked him to the door. "You know," she said hesitantly, "Ethan's school has a career day coming up. Parents and other adults come to talk about their jobs. He mentioned wanting to ask you to come talk about being a custodian, or as he puts it, the person who fixes everything and notices important stuff." Mike smiled. "I'd like that, though I'm not sure how exciting the kids will find discussions about floor wax and plumbing tools." "It's not about that," Andrea said softly. "It's about showing them that heroes come in all roles. That sometimes the most important person in the building is the one most people overlook." In the weeks that followed, Mike continued his duties at Pinewood Elementary with the same quiet dedication he'd always shown. The halls were kept clean, the lights functioned properly, and the building remained a safe, well-maintained environment for learning. But something fundamental had changed not just for Mike, but for the entire school community. Staff members who had once barely acknowledged the custodian now sought his insights about students who might be struggling. Children who had previously run past him in the halls stopped to share their accomplishments or concerns. The invisible barriers between different roles within the school had begun to dissolve, creating a more connected community where everyone recognized their shared responsibility for student welfare. One year after Mike had first noticed Ethan's reluctance to remove his shoes, he stood in the school's multipurpose room watching the second-grade graduation ceremony. Ethan, now preparing to move up to third grade, caught his eye from the stage and gave a small wave. The boy still attended weekly therapy sessions, but he had made remarkable progress. He participated fully in gym class, wore sandals on warm days, and had even joined the soccer team, all unimaginable achievements a year earlier. After the ceremony, Ethan ran to where Mike and Andrea stood together. "Mr. Callahan, did you see my certificate? I got the science award," he exclaimed, proudly displaying his achievement. "That's fantastic, buddy," Mike said warmly. "I always knew you were a careful observer. That's what makes a good scientist." As Ethan dashed off to join his friends, Andrea turned to Mike. "The school counselor told me something interesting today," she said. "Apparently Ethan mentioned in one of their sessions that he wants to be either a doctor who helps kids the right way or a school custodian who notices when kids are in trouble. Quite the career options." Mike felt a surge of emotion he couldn't quite name. "Either way, I think he'll make a difference." "He already has," Andrea said softly. "So have you." After the celebration, Mike returned to his routine duties, checking the building before closing for the summer break. In the quiet hallways, he reflected on how a simple observation about a child's shoes had set in motion events that transformed numerous lives, including his own. Systems had been improved, a predator removed from society, and most importantly, a child had been given the chance to heal and grow. In the maintenance office, Mike carefully placed Ethan's framed photo on his desk, where it would remind him daily of why his work mattered. The school would implement the new safety protocols he'd helped develop when classes resumed in the fall. Andrea had invited him to join her family for a 4th of July picnic. Small ripples of positive change continued to spread outward from that one moment of noticing what others had missed. As Mike closed up the building for the evening, he passed the second-grade classroom where Ethan had spent the year. On the bulletin board outside, student artwork still hung, their visions of future careers. His eyes found Ethan's drawing immediately, a figure in blue maintenance coveralls standing protectively beside a small boy in red sneakers. Above them, written in careful letters, "Heroes notice things others miss." Recovery wouldn't be instant for Ethan or the other children affected by Whitmore's abuse, but the foundation for safety had finally been laid, allowing the slow work of healing to begin. The systems, too, were changing: new protocols, better training, increased vigilance. Small but significant steps toward ensuring no child would remain hidden behind a pair of shoes that never came off. Mike Callahan locked the school doors and headed home, the weight of his keys familiar in his pocket. Tomorrow, he would begin helping Andrea repair the treehouse in her backyard. A summer project for Ethan to enjoy. Not an ending, but the tangible beginning of a journey forward for all of them. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more. When a quiet school janitor notices a little boy, Leo, always sitting on the cold classroom floor instead of his chair, it is, at first, just another small, peculiar detail in the daily life of Northwood Elementary. But this peculiar habit was more than a child's whim. It was a silent, desperate signal that only the janitor, a man who saw what others overlooked, seemed to register. Because what that unassuming janitor would eventually uncover beneath that small, wooden chair wasn't just dust, but a chilling secret hidden in plain sight, one that threatened to shatter the school's peaceful facade forever. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you believe that every child deserves a safe space, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that matter. For weeks, the janitor, Arthur, observed this silent, stubborn ritual, a quiet question mark in the bright, bustling classroom, until he moved the boy's chair one afternoon and found the first scrawled message that changed everything. Arthur had been the custodian at Northwood Elementary for 15 years, a man who preferred the company of his thoughts and the rhythmic swish of his broom to the complexities of conversation. His life was one of meticulous routine and silent observation, the school his domain after the last bell rang. His small apartment, always impeccably clean, echoed with a stillness that was both a comfort and a quiet sorrow, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos of the children he saw but rarely interacted with. But nothing could prepare Arthur for the chilling truth he was about to uncover, a truth hidden in plain sight, in the simple act of a child choosing the floor over a chair. Arthur Penwright was a man etched with the quiet lines of a life lived largely in the background. In his late 50s, with a touch of silver at his temples and hands calloused from years of physical work, he moved through the halls of Northwood Elementary like a familiar ghost, noticed but rarely engaged. He had lost his wife, Martha, a decade prior, and the silence she left behind had become his closest companion. He found a certain solace in the order he could impose on the school, gleaming floors, spotless windows, the neat rows of desks he'd straighten each evening. He saw everything: the fleeting expressions on children's faces, the discarded notes in waste bins, the subtle shifts in the school's atmosphere. And for the past month, his attention had been increasingly drawn to Leo, a small, dark-haired boy in Miss Evelyn Reed's first-grade class. Leo, who always, without fail, sat on the polished linoleum floor beside his little wooden chair. The school nurse, Sarah Evans, was one of the few staff members Arthur exchanged more than a cursory nod with. She was a kind woman in her 40s, with a no-nonsense demeanor that softened when dealing with a tearful child or a worried parent. Arthur respected her pragmatic compassion. He hadn't spoken to her about Leo, not yet. What would he say? That a boy preferred the floor? It sounded trivial even to him, despite the persistent unease it stirred. Leo was in Ms. Evelyn Reed's class. Ms. Reed was a newer addition to Northwood, arriving at the start of the school year with a glowing portfolio of recommendations and a reputation for innovative teaching methods. She was energetic, articulate, her classroom a vibrant hub of activity. Parents admired her. The principal, Mr. Henderson, often lauded her fresh approach. But Arthur, in his silent transits, had caught glimpses of something else. A fleeting rigidity in Ms. Reed's posture when a child was slow to understand, a saccharine smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, a sharpness in her voice, quickly smoothed over, that seemed discordant with her carefully constructed image of nurturing patience. There were no overt rumors, just the occasional hushed comment from a seasoned teaching assistant about Ms. Reed being a bit intense or very particular. One blustery afternoon, Arthur was mopping a spill in the corridor just outside Ms. Reed's classroom. The door was slightly ajar. He saw Ms. Reed crouched beside Leo, who had apparently dropped his box of crayons, scattering them across the floor. Ms. Reed's voice was a low, syrupy murmur, too quiet for Arthur to discern the words, but Leo flinched, his small shoulders hunching. Her hand was on his arm, and from Arthur's angle, her fingers seemed to be gripping him with undue pressure. Then, a parent walked by the open doorway. Instantly, Ms. Reed's expression transformed. Her smile became warm, genuine-looking, as she greeted the parent. Her touch on Leo's arm softened into a gentle pat. "Accidents happen, don't they, sweetie?" she said brightly, her voice now carrying. The moment was over in a flash, leaving Arthur with a cold knot in his stomach. He'd seen the switch, the carefully managed facade. Northwood Elementary, with its colorful murals depicting smiling animals and inspirational quotes, its lingering scent of disinfectant and school lunches, was meant to be a haven. Arthur had always believed that, had dedicated his working life to maintaining its physical integrity, its cleanliness, its order. But now, watching Leo, and watching Ms. Reed, he felt a subtle dissonance, a discordant note in the school's cheerful symphony. Leo's insistence on the floor was more than a quirk. Arthur had seen Ms. Reed try to coax Leo into his chair on several occasions. "Come on, Leo, the floor is so cold. Your chair is much comfier," she'd say, her voice a model of concern. Leo would just shake his head, his gaze fixed downward, a tiny, silent rebellion. And each time, Arthur noted the almost imperceptible tightening of Ms. Reed's jaw, the brief flicker of something hard in her eyes before the patient smile was back in place. This small, persistent act of defiance by the child, and the teacher's strained reaction, began to feel like a critical, unspoken narrative unfolding before Arthur's very eyes. Weeks turned into a month, and Arthur's disquiet grew into a gnawing worry. Every afternoon, as he cleaned Miss Evelyn Reed's classroom, his eyes would linger on Leo's empty chair, placed neatly beside his desk, and the small patch of floor where the boy spent his days. It was late one Thursday, the school hushed and settling into its nightly quietude, the scent of chalk dust and leftover glue heavy in the air. Arthur had finished sweeping and was wiping down the desks. He reached Leo's station. The little wooden chair, with its slightly worn seat and sturdy legs, seemed to mock him with its emptiness. Why the floor? Why always the floor? A sudden, inexplicable compulsion, a gut feeling he couldn't ignore, made him pause. He ran his calloused hand over the smooth, cool surface of the seat. Then, on an impulse, he tilted the chair forward, angling it so he could see the underside. His heart gave a small, sharp jolt. Taped discreetly to the very center of the wooden seat bottom, almost invisible against the grain unless one were specifically looking, was a small, grimy piece of paper, folded into a tight square. It was old tape, yellowed at the edges. His breath hitched. This had to be something. This felt significant. With fingers that trembled slightly, rough from years of gripping brooms and wrenches, he carefully peeled the tape away, taking the note with it. He straightened up, his gaze darting to the closed classroom door, a sudden fear of discovery making his pulse quicken. He unfolded the paper. It was a child's drawing, crude and shaky. A depiction of a chair, instantly recognizable as the small wooden chairs in the classroom. But this one was covered in angry, jagged red scribbles like flames or slashes. Next to the chair, a small stick-figure child lay on the floor, tears streaming from its simple circle eyes. Beneath the drawing, one word was printed in uneven, shaky capitals. Hurt. Arthur gasped, a sharp, audible intake of breath that seemed to shatter the silence of the empty room. The air suddenly felt colder, the familiar classroom alien and threatening. The vague unease he'd harbored for weeks now coalesced into a sickening certainty. The coldness in Ms. Reed's eyes, Leo's persistent fear, his unwavering rejection of his own chair. It wasn't eccentricity. It was a desperate, silent scream. The chair wasn't just uncomfortable. It was, in Leo's mind, a source of pain, of hurt. This wasn't just a sensitive child struggling to adjust. This was a child in profound distress, trying to communicate in the only way he knew how. Arthur's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drum against his ribs. He looked around the cheerfully decorated classroom, at the colorful alphabet posters and the neat rows of learning stations, and a wave of nausea washed over him. It felt like a crime scene, and he, the unwitting discoverer of its first, terrible clue. His immediate instinct was to run to Mr. Henderson, the principal, to lay this horrifying little drawing on his desk. but a cold wave of caution washed over him. Ms. Reed was the golden teacher, lauded and admired. What if Mr. Henderson dismissed it as a child's overactive imagination? What if he simply spoke to Ms. Reed, alerting her, making things worse for Leo? Arthur, the janitor, with his quiet ways and his lack of academic credentials, who would take his word, his interpretation of a child's crude drawing, against that of a celebrated educator? He needed more. He couldn't risk making things worse for the boy. With a deep, shuddering breath, he carefully folded the note and slipped it into the pocket of his work shirt, the small square of paper feeling like a lead weight against his chest. He would watch. He would look. He had to find something more undeniable. The next day, Arthur was a bundle of nerves, his usual calm shattered. He made a point of being in the hallway when Ms. Reed's class was transitioning to the library. He watched Leo from a distance. The boy seemed even more withdrawn than usual, his small face pale, his eyes like dark, haunted pools. He clung to the edge of the line, as if trying to make himself invisible. Ms. Reed, ever poised, led her class with a bright smile, but Arthur thought he detected a new tension in her shoulders, a sharper edge to her otherwise melodic voice when she called for quiet. Later that afternoon, during his cleaning rounds, Arthur deliberately left his own small, fold-up stool, the one he sometimes used for reaching high shelves or resting his back for a moment near Leo's desk area, just to see if Leo might use it as a hiding place, if he was indeed trying to communicate with Arthur specifically. He checked it before leaving the room. Nothing. Disappointment warred with a strange sort of relief. He then meticulously, covertly, checked around Leo's desk, under the lip of the desktop, inside the shallow storage cubby. His fingers brushed against something small and metallic. A single silver button, the kind often found on children's cardigans. He didn't recognize it as belonging to anything he'd seen Leo wear. He pocketed it, another small, unsettling piece of a puzzle he couldn't yet comprehend. He realized then that his initial discovery under Leo's chair was likely an older message, one that had been there for some time. If Leo was still trying to communicate, he'd need to find a new way, or Arthur would need to be much more observant. The reality of the situation settled upon him with a chilling weight. This was not a passive observation anymore. He was actively seeking evidence of something terrible, and the thought that Leo might be depending on him, a virtual stranger, was both terrifying and galvanizing. The stakes felt intensely personal now. A few anxious days passed. Arthur's sleep was troubled, filled with images of Leo's sad eyes and the angry red scribbles on the drawing. He knew he couldn't keep this to himself for much longer, but the fear of not being believed, of inadvertently making Leo's situation worse, held him captive. He decided to try a different approach. Instead of looking for notes from Leo, he would observe Ms. Reed more closely, searching for any crack in her polished facade. One lunchtime he saw her in the staff lounge, speaking with another teacher. Her back was to Arthur, who was refilling the paper towel dispenser. Her voice, usually so carefully modulated, was sharp, impatient. "Some children simply require more rigorous boundaries," she was saying, a distinct edge in her tone. "They mistake kindness for weakness. One has to be firm from the outset." The other teacher murmured something indistinct, and Ms. Reed laughed, a short, brittle sound that held no warmth. It was a small thing, an overheard snippet, but it reinforced the image of a woman far sterner and less patient than she publicly appeared. The following Monday, Arthur arrived early, a plan forming in his mind. He knew that sometimes, if a child had an accident or needed a change of clothes, their soiled items were discreetly bagged and placed in a specific bin in the clinic for parents to collect. If Leo was being physically mistreated in a way that involved his chair, perhaps there was some evidence there. He timed his cleaning of the clinic to coincide with a period he knew Nurse Sarah was usually busy with morning medications. With a feigned casualness, he checked the designated bin. There were a couple of bags. One contained a t-shirt with a juice stain. The other, smaller, held a pair of little boy's trousers. He recognized the faded dinosaur print. They were Leo's. His heart hammered. He glanced around. The clinic was empty. He quickly, carefully opened the plastic bag. The trousers were damp, and there was a faint, unpleasant odor. But what made him draw a sharp breath were the distinct, darker patches on the seat of the trousers, and faint, almost invisible reddish-brown smudges that could have been blood, hastily wiped. He felt a surge of cold fury, followed by a wave of profound sadness for the little boy. This was more than a drawing. This was tangible. He quickly rebagged the trousers, his mind racing. He couldn't take them, that would be theft and would alert everyone. But he had seen it. He now knew the hurt was physical. That evening, the weight of his discoveries pressed down on Arthur. He felt utterly alone with this terrible knowledge. The quiet of his small apartment felt suffocating. He sat at his small kitchen table, the drawing of the chair and the memory of the stained trousers replaying in his mind. He thought of Sarah Evans, the school nurse. She was pragmatic, yes, but she was also kind. She saw children at their most vulnerable. Perhaps she would listen. The next morning, he found a moment when Sarah was alone in the clinic, catching up on paperwork. He hesitated by the door, twisting the brim of his old cap in his hands. "Nurse Evans," he began, his voice raspy. Can I talk to you about something?" "It's about a student." Sarah looked up, her expression open. "Of course, Arthur. Come. What's on your mind?" He stepped inside, the scent of antiseptic sharp in his nostrils. He told her, haltingly at first, then with growing urgency, about Leo always sitting on the floor, about the drawing he'd found under the chair, about the stained trousers in the bin. He didn't voice his full suspicions about Ms. Reed, not directly, but laid out what he had observed. Sarah listened intently, her brow furrowed, her pen still. When he finished, silence hung in the small room for a long moment. "Arthur," she said finally, her voice serious, "the drawing is disturbing, and the state of his trousers. That's concerning. Ms. Reed has mentioned that Leo has some challenges at home, that he's a very sensitive and sometimes accident-prone child. She said she's working closely with the family." Arthur's heart sank. Ms. Reed had already crafted a narrative, insulating herself. "But," Sarah continued, her gaze meeting his, "what you're describing, especially the drawing specifically mentioning hurt in relation to the chair, and the state of his clothing, that warrants a closer look. I can make an observation, and I think we need to have a discreet word with Mr. Henderson, together. Your observations are important, Arthur. You see things we don't always catch in the rush of the day. You're right to be concerned." A small measure of relief washed over Arthur. He wasn't alone in this anymore. Sarah's validation, her willingness to act, was a lifeline. It was a setback in that Ms. Reed had preemptively framed Leo, but Sarah's resolve was a significant step forward. The meeting with Mr. Henderson did not go as Arthur had hoped. Sarah presented their concerns calmly and professionally, with Arthur providing his first-hand accounts. Mr. Henderson listened, his expression growing increasingly troubled, but also, Arthur sensed, skeptical. Ms. Reed was, after all, his star teacher. "This is highly disturbing if true," Mr. Henderson said, steepling his fingers. "Evelyn Reed came to us with the highest recommendations. I find it very difficult to believe she would intentionally harm a child." He promised to look into it discreetly. To have a conversation with Ms. Reed, Arthur and Sarah left the principal's office feeling frustrated and uneasy. A conversation was not what they had hoped for. It felt like a dismissal, a way to smooth things over rather than confront a potentially horrifying reality. Arthur felt a surge of despair. He had risked so much coming forward, and it seemed to be for nothing. He now feared Ms. Reed would be alerted, would become more careful or worse, retaliate against Leo. The days that followed were fraught with tension. Arthur watched Ms. Reed like a hawk, but she was impeccably professional, her interactions with Leo, at least in public, gentle and patient. He feared she knew she was being watched. He checked under Leo's chair every evening. Nothing. He felt a sickening sense of failure. Had he made things worse? One afternoon, as he was cleaning the corridor, he saw Ms. Reed exiting her classroom after all the children had left. She paused when she saw him, her expression unreadable. "Arthur," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Mr. Henderson mentioned you had some concerns about Leo. I want to assure you, I have his best interests at heart. He's a complex child, with a difficult home life. We are all working together to support him. Her eyes, however, were cold, appraising. It was a clear warning, a velvet-gloved threat. He was being watched. He mumbled a polite, non-committal reply and retreated, his heart pounding. The personal risk had just escalated significantly. He was no longer just an observer. He was a known element of suspicion in her eyes. Arthur's morale plummeted. He felt trapped, his knowledge a heavy burden. He spent a sleepless night, the image of Leo's small, haunted face, and Ms. Reed's cold, challenging stare, burning in his mind. He couldn't give up. He owed it to Leo. He had to find something undeniable, something that Mr. Henderson couldn't dismiss, something that would force action. He thought about other places a child might hide something, or where evidence might be found. The next evening, after everyone had left, he returned to Ms. Reed's classroom. He didn't turn on the main lights, using only the dim glow from the hallway and his small flashlight. He went to Ms. Reed's desk. He knew it was a risk, a serious breach if he were caught. But the thought of Leo spurred him on. He carefully, meticulously, went through her desk waste bin piece by piece. Coffee cups, crumpled lesson plans, tissues. And then, at the very bottom, almost hidden beneath a discarded apple core, he found it. A small, spiral-bound notebook, the kind teachers often used for personal notes. He hesitated for only a second before opening it. Most pages were filled with lesson ideas, meeting reminders. But then, tucked towards the back, he found a page with a list of names. Children's names. Beside each name, there were notations. Next to Leo M., he saw a series of dates, and beside each date, a single, chilling word, closet, followed by durations. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 7 minutes. His blood ran cold. Closet? What closet? Then he saw, at the bottom of the page, a hastily scribbled note. Basement supply, old lock needs oil. The school had an old, largely disused basement, primarily for storing broken furniture and forgotten supplies. There were several old storage closets down there, rarely accessed. The full horror of it began to dawn on him. This wasn't just about the chair. This was systematic, premeditated cruelty. The basement. It was a place few ventured, damp, poorly lit, smelling of dust and decay. Arthur felt a tremor of fear, but also a grim resolve. He waited until he was sure he was the last person in the building. The night security guard, old Mr. Grumbles, likely ensconced in his small office by the front entrance with his radio. He took his master set of keys, his flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the darkened school corridors as he made his way to the heavy basement door. The stairs creaked ominously under his weight as he descended into the cool, subterranean gloom. He found the area with the old supply closets, their doors paint-peeled and cobweb-strewn. He consulted the school's old, faded floor plan he'd retrieved from his office, matching it to the note in Ms. Reed's notebook. Closet C, he found it. The lock was indeed old, stiff. He tried several keys before one finally, grudgingly, turned with a rusty shriek. He pulled the door open, his flashlight beam darting inside. The closet was small, no more than 3 feet square, windowless and pitch black without his light. The air inside was stale, suffocating. And then he saw them. On the dusty wooden floor, faint scuff marks, the outline of small shoes, as if a child had been standing, shifting, perhaps kicking softly in distress. And on the inside of the door, about a child's height, were tiny, desperate-looking scratches in the old paint, almost invisible. One set of scratches looked like a crudely formed letter. Liu. Arthur felt a profound wave of nausea and a searing, righteous anger. He had found her dungeon. The L scratched into the paint, the scuff marks on the floor, the chilling entries in Ms. Reed's notebook. Closet. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. It all coalesced into an undeniable, horrifying truth. Ms. Evelyn Reed, the celebrated teacher, was systematically tormenting a small child, locking him in this terrifying, dark space. The hurt associated with the chair was likely part of a larger pattern of intimidation and abuse, perhaps forcing him to sit in a way that caused pain, or using the chair as a precursor to other punishments. The full, sickening weight of his discovery crashed down on Arthur. This wasn't just harsh discipline. This was calculated, sadistic cruelty. His breath hitched in his throat. He felt a tremor run through his body, a mixture of revulsion and a cold, hard fury. He couldn't let Leo spend another day, another hour under Ms. Reed's shadow. The risk of waiting for Mr. Henderson to conduct his discreet inquiries was too great. What if Ms. Reed escalated her abuse, knowing she was under some scrutiny? What if Leo was in that closet right now? Arthur's heart leaped into his throat. He flashed his light around the small, empty space again, a desperate prayer on his lips. It was empty, thank God, but the evidence of its use was irrefutable. He had to act, and act decisively. He couldn't confront Ms. Reed himself. He was just the janitor, and she was manipulative and, he now realized, dangerous. He needed the authorities, people with the power to remove Leo from her care immediately. He thought of Nurse Sarah, but she, too, was bound by the school hierarchy. Then he remembered Officer Miller, a community relations policeman who had given a safety talk at the school the previous spring. Miller had seemed approachable, no nonsense, genuinely concerned about child welfare. Arthur had, on an impulse, kept the officer's business card, tucked away in his wallet. This was beyond school policy. This was a police matter, a child protection emergency. He would call Detective Miller first thing in the morning, even before his shift officially began. He carefully, methodically, took photographs of the closet interior, the scratches, the L, with his old, slightly battered smartphone. He then retrieved Ms. Reed's notebook from her desk, a risky move, but he knew it was crucial evidence. He would go to the police station directly if Miller couldn't meet him. Arthur barely slept that night. The notebook and the horrifying images from the basement seared into his consciousness. He kept the evidence, the original drawing, the notebook, his phone with the pictures, in the inner pocket of his work jacket, feeling its weight like a physical manifestation of his responsibility. He arrived at Northwood Elementary even earlier than usual, the pale dawn light doing little to dispel the chill in his soul. His stomach churned with a mixture of dread and grim determination. He parked his old pickup truck and sat for a moment, rehearsing what he would say to Detective Miller. Just as he was about to make the call, he saw Ms. Reed's car pull into the staff parking lot. She emerged, a bright smile fixed on her face as she juggled her tote bag and a steaming travel mug, looking every inch the dedicated, cheerful teacher. The sight of her, so placid, so normal, after what he now knew, filled Arthur with a fresh surge of revulsion and hardened his resolve. He waited until she had entered the building. Then, his hand trembling slightly, he dialed Detective Miller's number. Detective Miller answered on the third ring, his voice alert and professional despite the early hour. Arthur, his voice raspy with nerves and lack of sleep, quickly explained who he was and, in a torrent of words, laid out his horrifying discoveries, the drawings, the stained trousers, the notebook, the basement closet. The L. Miller listened in silence, interrupting only to ask a few clarifying questions. The notebook, you have it with you? The photographs are clear? His tone was serious, devoid of skepticism. When Arthur finished, Miller said, Mr. Penwright, stay calm. Do not approach Ms. Reed. Do not let anyone know you've spoken to me. I'm contacting Child Protective Services immediately. We will be at the school within the hour. Act as normally as possible. We'll meet you there. The wait was an agony of suspense. Arthur began his morning routine, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip his broom. The school slowly came alive around him, the cheerful shouts of children arriving, the slamming of locker doors, the distant chime of the first bell. The ordinary sounds felt alien, a grotesque counterpoint to the dark secret the school harbored. He saw Leo arrive, walking beside his mother, his small face pale and drawn, his eyes downcast. Arthur's heart ached for him. Less than an hour later, a plain car pulled up to the front entrance. Detective Miller emerged, along with a calm, serious-looking woman in civilian clothes, whom he introduced as Ms. Davies from Child Protective Services. They met Arthur briefly in Mr. Henderson's office. The principal, who had been hastily summoned, looked shocked, his face paling as Detective Miller coolly and concisely outlined Arthur's findings and the contents of Ms. Reed's notebook, which Arthur handed over. This was no longer a matter of discreet inquiries. This was a formal investigation. Ms. Davies, her voice gentle but firm, explained that their priority was to ensure Leo's safety. She and Mr. Henderson then proceeded to Ms. Reed's classroom. Detective Miller asked Arthur to wait in his small custodial office. Arthur wasn't present for the direct confrontation with Ms. Reed, nor did he want to be. He paced the confines of his tiny office, the scent of floor wax and old mops suddenly cloying. After what felt like an eternity, he saw, through the small window in his door that overlooked the main hallway, Ms. Davies gently leading a very small, very quiet Leo by the hand. Leo wasn't crying. He just looked stunned, his eyes wide and lost. He clutched a tattered stuffed rabbit. Ms. Reed was not with them. She remained in the classroom with Mr. Henderson, and soon Detective Miller joined them. The intervention was swift, quiet, designed to minimize any further trauma to Leo. Arthur watched Leo disappear down the hall with Ms. Davies, a profound, aching mixture of relief and sorrow washing over him. The boy was out of immediate danger. He had done what he could. He sank onto his worn chair, the adrenaline that had sustained him for days suddenly ebbing, leaving him feeling hollow and exhausted. He clutched the first small, folded drawing of the hurt chair, which he had kept separate, a reminder of the initial spark of his terrible suspicion. He waited, listening to the muffled sounds from down the hall, the occasional raised voice, then quiet again. Finally, Detective Miller appeared at his office door. His expression was grim, but he gave Arthur a small, weary nod. "You did good, Arthur," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Ms. Reed has been asked to accompany us to the station for questioning. She's been suspended, effective immediately. Leo is with Ms. Davies, he's safe. They're taking him to be medically checked, and then to a child advocacy center where he can talk to a specialist." The relief that flooded Arthur was so immense it almost buckled his knees. He had risked his livelihood, his quiet, ordered existence, but Leo was safe. That was the only thing that mattered. Detective Miller added, his voice softening slightly, "Your evidence was crucial. The notebook, the photos of that god-awful closet. It was all there." Ms. Davies said Leo has already started to open up a little. He confirmed he was scared of the dark room. The truth was out. Ms. Reed's reign of terror over one small boy was over. Arthur leaned heavily against the cold cinder block wall of his small office, the sounds of the school fading into a dull hum. He let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for weeks, a ragged, shuddering exhalation. Tears, hot and unexpected, pricked at the corners of his eyes, not tears of sadness, but of sheer, unadulterated relief. A profound release of tension that left him trembling. He slowly, deliberately, unclenched his fists, his knuckles white from the pressure. Detective Miller, before leaving, had mentioned, "This isn't going to be swept under the rug, Arthur. Because of your actions, and what we've uncovered, the school district is already discussing implementing mandatory annual retraining for all staff on recognizing and reporting signs of abuse. And an anonymous, dedicated reporting hotline is being fast-tracked. What you did here has already sparked significant change." Arthur absorbed this with a quiet nod, the words a small balm on the raw emotions he felt. A few days later, Ms. Davies from Child Protective Services brought Leo to the school briefly. He needed to collect a few personal items from his cubby, a favorite book, a drawing he'd made before Ms. Reed's shadow had fallen so heavily upon him. Arthur happened to be polishing the brass plaque on the wall in the main hallway, a mindless, familiar task. He saw them approaching. Leo, holding Ms. Davies' hand tightly, looked up and saw Arthur. The boy stopped. He looked at Arthur for a long, solemn moment, his dark eyes unblinking. Then, very slowly, he let go of Ms. Davies' hand, reached into the pocket of his little jacket, and pulled out a small, smooth, gray stone, the kind one finds on a riverbed. He walked directly over to Arthur, his small face serious, and silently, shyly, pressed the stone into Arthur's calloused palm. He didn't smile, not a full smile, but the corners of his mouth twitched upwards, and his eyes, for the very first time Arthur had ever truly seen them, held a tiny, flickering spark of something other than fear. It might have been curiosity, or perhaps the nascent beginnings of trust. Miss Davies watched them, a gentle, understanding smile on her face. "He wanted you to have it, Arthur," she said softly. "He told me you're his friend. He said you helped him." In that silent, profound exchange, as his fingers closed around the cool smoothness of the stone, Arthur understood. He hadn't just stopped the darkness engulfing one small child. He had helped preserve a future, a chance for light. The first, fragile seeds of healing and trust were, at that very moment, being sown. Arthur knew the path ahead for Leo would be long and undoubtedly challenging, filled with therapy, support, and the slow, arduous process of rebuilding a sense of safety in the world. Recovery from such trauma wouldn't be instant, not by any means. But seeing that tiny, courageous flicker of trust in Leo's eyes, feeling the unexpected weight of the small stone in his hand, Arthur felt a profound, unshakable sense of hope. The foundation for safety for Leo had finally, blessedly, been laid. The slow, essential work of healing could now begin. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the possibility of sunlight in Leo's young life felt real, tangible, and attainable. Arthur returned to his duties. The rhythms of the school day, the ringing of bells, the distant shouts of children at play, slowly began to feel normal again, though forever changed in his perception. The halls of Northwood Elementary were no longer just a place of work, a series of floors to be swept and windows to be cleaned. They were a place he had a renewed, unspoken duty to protect, his quiet observations now imbued with a deeper, more vigilant purpose. He found a quiet satisfaction in his familiar tasks, a profound sense of having made a difference in a way he had never imagined possible. His quiet, empty house still awaited him each evening, but it felt a little less empty now, filled with the quiet resonance of his actions. Several weeks later, Ms. Davies contacted Arthur again. Leo was in a good temporary foster placement, she explained, but he was understandably struggling to connect, often withdrawn and very quiet. He kept asking about the kind janitor man, the man who had been nice to him. Ms. Davies spoke carefully, explaining the complexities of the child welfare system, the long processes involved. But then she paused. "Leo needs stability, Arthur," she said. "He needs to see consistent, kind, safe adults in his life. You've already been vetted through this investigation, and you've shown him extraordinary compassion. He trusts you. We were wondering, would you consider becoming a mentor for him? A regular, friendly face? Perhaps down the line, if things progress well for both of you." She trailed off, leaving the implication unspoken but clear. Arthur looked around his small, meticulously tidy office, then thought of his quiet, empty apartment, the silence that so often filled it. A warmth spread through his chest, a sense of an unexpected, luminous path opening up before him, a path he had never anticipated. He nodded slowly, a lump forming in his throat. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "Yes, I'd like that very much." It was the fragile, hopeful beginning of a new chapter, a connection forged in the crucible of darkness, now pointing steadfastly towards the light. That evening, Arthur sat in his familiar armchair in his quiet apartment. The small, gray stone Leo had given him rested on the windowsill, catching the very last, gentle rays of the setting sun, glowing softly. He picked it up, its smooth, cool weight a tangible comfort in his palm. A future he hadn't sought, hadn't even dreamed of, was cautiously, wonderfully, beginning to unfold. He felt a deep sense of earned peace, a quiet, profound satisfaction, and the almost forgotten warmth of a new, burgeoning human connection. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.